All right, we can get started then. My name is Kath, and welcome to the Supervision of Peer Workforce Conference. I'm with Cher. This is the 9 a.m. session, and it's called Peers with Purpose, How to Create a Peer Job Worth Doing with Lynnae Brown. Lynnae Brown serves as director of Howie the Harp Advocacy Center, a peer-led and staffed employment training program for people in mental health recovery. Based in Harlem, New York City, HTH has trained hundreds of individuals across the metropolitan area to offer supportive services using their lived experience along with peer support principles. Lynnae is an NYS certified peer specialist, and her work has been featured in BRIC TV's Be Heard Mental Health series in 2018. If you wouldn't mind saving your questions until the end, we'll have time where you can raise your virtual hand. If there's anything in the meantime, feel free to send me a direct message, or if you're having any technical difficulties or anything like that. And I will let you take it away, Lynnae.
Great. Thank you so much, Kath, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the presentation. I'm going to share screen. Let me see here. Let me get my presentation up. Let's see here. Awesome. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. So again, thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to be talking about a subject matter that's really important to me. As Kath had said, my name is Lynnae. I serve as director of an organization or a program called Howie the Harp Advocacy Center. We are really well known for our peer training program. We've been around since 1995, named after our founder, Howie the Harp, who was one of the many civil rights leaders in the consumer psychiatric movement. And so I'm going to start off with a couple of learning objectives. We're going to talk about the difference between a peer role and a peer job. We're going to talk about the factors that go into developing a peer job. And I'm going to talk about some interview and some tips for a successful hire. Just some housekeeping. As Kath had said, we're going to do some Q&A at the end because I want to push through the material itself. I don't want, and because it kind of builds on top of each other. And also, this is an offering. This presentation is about knowing that you are all in this field, in the trenches. Take what works and leave the rest. Like, take what resonates for you, what works for you, because ultimately, I don't know exactly what you do or what you're up against. So it's going to be up to you to decide for yourself what works and what doesn't work for you. And also, the one thing to consider when it comes to peer work in general is that there's no Vatican of peer support, meaning there's no one entity that drives all of this. This is one of the challenges we have in our field, but there's also some kind of great because it allows for us to for each of our different regions, each of our different cities, to make some decisions based on what our participants need in any given area. And also know that I'm coming from providing a framework to work from, so we don't have any definitive answers. I always find it much more helpful for people to think in terms of what's an important, how to think about something in order to come up with the answers that they're looking for. And then also for this presentation, know that when I talk about peer, I'm talking about the professional role of a job. Sometimes peer, when people say peer, they're talking about people who have mental health recovery experience. So in some areas, that is an important definition. But for this particular presentation, I'm talking about the actual professional role of a peer. Let me see. Uh-oh. My thing isn't moving. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying a little background of mine to start off with. Again, I'm the director of a peer training program. I am middle management. So know that I'm also coming from the perspective of running a program. I understand the stresses from being pulled from many directions. I have to answer to the agency. I have to answer to our senior management. I have to answer to funders. I have to answer to my own staff. I have to answer to participants. So I'm coming from that perspective. So even if I don't continue to mention that throughout the presentation, know I get it. I get it, that perspective as well. But here's what I'm coming from is why this presentation to me is so important is because often requests and other information that I've received and feedback I've gotten from peers are things like requests from employers asking HTH for peers without job descriptions. Like I'll get emails saying, hey, we have jobs open. Can you send some peers open? Can you send some peers over? Like, to do what? But you'd be surprised how often we get that kind of request. I've heard of new hires of peers being asked, so what do you do? Like they're hired, they get to their job and their supervisor asks them, so what do you do? Like, and I'm leaves me wondering, what do they hire? What was the hiring process like? And then, of course, something that we're up against across the field is as working peers used to monitor participants, like mini case managers, medication compliance, using as spies for clinicians. I've heard of people asking peers, like, yeah, go find out what they're talking about and then come back and tell me. Like, that's what I mean by spies. So sorry, not sorry if I get a little sassy. I'm a big Lynnae Brown believer. I do my best not to shame anyone. I understand that, we're all doing the best we can. So please excuse any sass. I might give you a little longer way, but no, that's where it's coming from. Okay. No, that's where it's coming from. Okay. So the first thing I want to ask this question is how to create an effective peer job, right? I'm going to do the analogy is like, how do you hire social workers, right? You know what a social worker does. They coordinate service. They have a very ambiguous job in the sense that they're supposed to generally help people in their well-being, right? You understand the intersection of what participants need and what social workers do. So I would say the same energy you put into understanding what a social worker does is the same energy you need to understand what a peer does or what a peer can do. It takes thought. So I'm going to start first by talking about the difference between a peer role and a peer job, because sometimes people get those a little bit mixed up. When I talk about the peer role, I'm talking about an overall purpose of a peer's presence on a team, the why have a peer? And then I'm talking about, and the other part of it is the actual job. So the job responsibilities in a work environment based on the peer role. What do you have a peer do at the job itself? And of course, that's going to vary because that's going to depend on, the actual environment that you are in and what you're working with. So here's what I'd like to do is something that I think really helps people really start to understand the importance of lived experience. I'd love to give an analogy. So one of the analogy scenarios I'll give is the idea of becoming a new parent. Put yourself in a situation where you're going to be a new parent, whether it's by choice or by chance, and you're just very excited and nervous and any other feeling that you might have about becoming a first-time parent. And I said to you, okay, so you have one of three choices. I can give you access to this world-renowned child psychologists, like people who know and studied children across the world, who can give you all the latest studies, the latest understandings of child psychology, but they don't have any children themselves. Or you can talk to the most world-renowned pediatricians. These folks have been working with children all of their lives. They know all of its medical conditions. They know exactly what's happening with children physically, but they don't have any children themselves. And then your third choice is you could talk to parents, everyday parents across the globe, people who know what it's like to be a parent, but they themselves might be male persons, teachers, etc. They're not quote unquote professionals in the field of child psychology or pediatrician. As a first-time parent, who are you most drawn to? Who are you most drawn to? More than likely, you're most drawn to other parents. Why? Lived experience. They understand what it means to be a parent. They understand the emotions around being a first-time parent. They know about the stigma and the landmines around what parenting means, right? They get that. They understand where they're the ones you talk to when you're like, look, I yelled at my kid the other day and now I feel really terrible. Those are the people you want to talk to for your support around becoming a parent. And note, this is the important part, and note, talking to another parents does not negate the importance of a child psychologist or a pediatrician, right? Because if your kid has a sore throat, you're not going to bring your kid to your friend and say, my kid has a sore throat. What do I do? You're going to bring the child to the pediatrician Or if your child is having some emotional problems for some reason and you want some help surrounding that, you're going to go to a child psychologist, right? These roles don't negate each other. They all serve a purpose in helping you raise your child and becoming a parent. This is the analogy you want to keep in mind in terms of what the role of peers. The peer experience is an addition. It's a much needed and appreciated addition to a team of people helping other people in their recovery process. So that's why I really want to emphasize that. That's oftentimes not understood in terms of considered an important part of that framework in terms of recovery. So when you talk about the peer role, the role is about modeling hope in recovery and the recovery possibilities. The understanding that the diagnosis is not an identity or a death sentence. And the idea that to reclaim to full humanity and overall life wants, needs, and choices, and not just symptom management. And that recovery is holistic. It's not symptom management. That's more medical model. And that recovery happens in relationship. Recovery happens between and among people. You don't recover by yourself in a room. Hold on to that thought as we keep talking. So, in other words, being in relationship matters. And this is an overall kind of understanding I want to couch this discussion in. So we live in a capitalistic country where full humanity isn't always valued. Working with people is not always valued. I mean, you see the wages of anyone who works and cares for people. That tells you a lot about how we value caring for people. And yet in our bones, we know that being with each other is essential. It's the effects of the pandemic on our collective well-being. This pandemic has absolutely demonstrated the importance of being together and what happens when we're not. So when you think about the role of a peer, consider that their being and presence is a huge part of their work. It's not just the doing, it's the being and the presence. So let's talk about the actual job itself so we make some distinctions. So the job of employment, well, obviously, as I said earlier, depends on the services being provided and the needs of the participants that you're serving. But you think about this, how can the role of the peer support augment the recovery services for your participants? These are some various titles you might see in jobs or something you might have seen along the way in your own work. So like, for instance, a peer counselor might be somebody who coaches and offers one-on-one support. Peer facilitator runs groups. Peer bridger, connecting participants to services. Peer advocate, amplifying the wants and needs of participants. Peer specialist is kind of a catch-all phrase of peer work. And peer navigator, helping participants through bureaucratic systems. Those are just some of the titles of actual jobs themselves. So when you think about factors in developing a peer job, here's what I would say. I would say first you want to consider what's the end game for your overall services, not just the peer itself, but your overall end game of the services you're offering. So in other words, things like, what is the experience you hope participants have with your services programming while actually in program? Or what do you hope participants will say to their friends and family or anyone that asks about their experience with your services? And how would you like participants to think about their experience with your services years down the road? And I say this because, again, depending on the services that you're offering, you're seeing people at a very specific time in their lives. You don't know them before that. And when they leave their services, you don't know them after that. And I especially find this a critical point if you're working in services where the people you're working with are in crisis and you're first meeting people while they're in crisis. If you know perfectly well, and just in everyday life, first impressions matter. So if your first impression of someone is they're in crisis, you might be holding that that's who they are, and that's not who they are. So that's why I'm saying, think about the end game, especially if you're working with people in crisis. What is your end game? What are you hoping that they get from your services? What do you want them to say about your services? How do you want them to look back at your services and how that affected their recovery? So again, keep going with this idea. Factors develop the job. So you vision the end game, and then you work backwards from that. And quite frankly, what I'm talking about and the way I'm doing this approach is actually how I decide on everything. I just think of my end game and work backwards, right? That's the target, working backwards, right? You also want to consider the role of the peer, like their parent analogy I just gave you, this being, this presence, and what they can offer on your team of supportive services. The other thing you want to consider too is research your state peer certification for ethics about what peers do and don't do. Like medication compliance, that's not a peer job. They shouldn't be monitoring whether your participants are taking their medication or not. That's not their job. Okay, but what's really cool, like for instance, almost every state I think in the country has a peer certification. I know in New York State, they have like this lovely document of peer ethics. So I encourage you to find the peer ethics and write in and read them and figure out. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Ruth. Backwards design. Nice. Thank you for that. And consider that part of it as well in terms of thinking through what you would like, how a peer can support your services. Then you want to think about things like, what is a gap in service that a person with a similar lived experience could offer your participants that supports the overall intention of your services? What can their being support? And then what skills does a peer applicant need to meet the needs of the job? And what can you or are you willing to teach? And what are some non-negotiables? And we'll come back to that. The computer skills, social skills for effective participant engagement, et cetera, right? Again, the answers to these questions are all going to depend on where you are. Someone who, if you work at an inpatient unit, that's going to be a difference than if you work with somebody crisis respite, which is going to be different from working in supportive housing, which is going to be different from inpatient, which is going to be different from outpatient. Like, this is why it's important to understand, be able to answer those questions for yourself and where you work. But I want to kind of go over a couple of myths about when it comes to hiring peers. No particular order. One of the first myths that we come across a lot is if someone has lived experience with mental health recovery, they can do peer work. That's not necessarily true. That's like hiring a social worker by their degree only. Right? Mental health recovery experience does not equal people engagement skills, computer skills, collaboration skills, communication skills. You have to assess for the skills you need from people when you hire. This is a huge mistake that was made, especially early in the days. I'm still seeing it now. And myth number 2, the peer will know exactly what to do on the job since they have lived experience. No, it's like, no. You want to make sure you have a clear job description. You want to make sure you have clear expectations. What does a job well done look like? Again, I'm saying this we're talking about peer roles, but this is really something we should be doing for all jobs, just so you know. All jobs, really. Right? You want to collaborate with peers about what participants may need, along with asking participants, right? The beauty of having someone on your staff that lived experience is they can draw from their own experience to help think through and be creative in terms of how to engage with participants. That's the beauty of having lived experience on your staff, right? They might have some insights that you wouldn't get from a book. They more than likely will have insights that you wouldn't get from a book or be able to read about someplace. They can make connections because they've been through it, right? And this is something note that I learned as a supervisor, program manager myself. No one told me this, but I just know that this is just true. As a supervisor, as a manager, your main job is to uphold the vision of programming standard for the work of staff to live into. It's your job as a supervisor, as a manager, to have the full programming in mind and making sure what everyone's doing on the team lives into that programming. You can't assume that everyone is going to know that at all times, but you're using that yourself. You understand the overall needs of the program in order to help everyone on the team to live into those expectations. I would say, for example, For instance, I know that as a program director, when we get audited, when they read progress notes, they always say we want narrative. Make sure we want to see a narrative written in the progress notes so that we can see that you're working with people over time and that you're addressing needs. Okay, that's my responsibility to keep. That's why we need to write progress notes and narrative. I know that because that's what the funders want. That's my job. So if I see one of my coaches not doing that, that's my job to do as a reminder. That's what we have to do, a narrative. So make sure you follow up and put that in the notes. They don't need to know. They don't know. I would offer that it's for audit reasons, of course, but that's for me to hold. That's not for them to hold. That's not for the career coach to hold. That makes sense? So when it comes to, keeping that in mind, this is really important when you're hiring peers or, again, anyone, really anyone. Understanding what the peer role is, what they do, and it's your responsibility as a supervisor to hold space to make sure everyone's work is living into the programming. That is not a peer's individual job to do. And myth number 3 of hiring peers, pathologizing social skills instead of considering. And this one I feel very sassy about. Being new to social service culture. I will say this is the only social service job I've ever had. I've been working at Howie the Harp for 11 years. It's the only social service job I ever had. I come from capitalistic, profit world, right? Social service is very different in, at least I found it to be very different in terms of culture. I think partly it's because in profit world, it's very direct. Your profit is based on pleasing whoever's your client is. They're paying for what you're doing. In a nonprofit, it's more difficult because the people paying for the services aren't the people that you're serving. So it kind of makes it difficult. And that's why sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between being useful, making sure your services are very useful, and at the same time living into whatever your funders are saying you have to do. I think that often makes a really weird tension. But the thing is this, what I'm seeing over and over again, and we have it in my agency as well, and I see it a lot, is that social service culture is very much predicated on nice and polite, as opposed to kind and clear. And it can be very gaslighty because of it. It can feel very gaslighty. And I'll give you an example. I remember when I first started, my boss, my supervisor, I would talk to her and she would say, I suggest that you, blah, 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 blah. Well, in everyday English, suggest means I can or I can do something else, right? It's a suggestion. I can do this or I can do something else if I have a better idea. So if I had a better idea, sometimes I would maybe not take her suggestion. Sometimes I would. And then when I didn't take her suggestion, she would kind of get pursed-lipped with me. I thought I suggested blah, 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 blah. And I would think, yeah, I heard you. I heard your suggestion. I was just thinking that this might work out better. So that's why I did this. Over time, I realized, oh, that was a directive. That suggestion was a directive. Okay. That takes a minute to get used to because you're not saying what you freaking mean. How is that my fault? But then this kind of miscommunication is very, very difficult to manage through when you're not, to work through when you're not used to that kind of communication. That kind of read between the lines. That also taps into our hypervigilance. That's what I mean by gaslighting. Because when you're in a room and people aren't telling the truth and you know there's a pink elephant and the tension in the room, I'm telling you as a person with lived experience, I'm sitting there in this room going, I know something's happening. I don't know what it is. All of a sudden the hackles on the back of my neck are up. I'm hypervigilant because I'm thinking, is it me? Am I in trouble? No one's normalizing anything. I sometimes might even get dysregulated in those situations. My nervous system kind of goes a little like that. And that affects my performance. Just putting it out there. That has nothing to do with mental health or being a peer. That has to do with the dysfunctional work environment, period. No one works well under that. No one does. And you could do research on that if you want, but no one works under that. The other portion that really about pathologized, well, you know what I mean, social skills is that for peer work, it's really challenging to balance between using your lived experience with professional boundaries. It's really difficult because here you are using your lived experience, what you know to be true. It's kind of like having your heart on your sleeve in somewhat, but at the same time, you're doing a job. And that is hard to maneuver. It's hard to maneuver. And sometimes, and you know how boundaries work, is sometimes you don't know the boundary till you step over a line. Sometimes that's what happens. You step over the line, you're like, oh, realize, okay, I stepped over a line. Okay, let me back up. That's how you learn about boundaries oftentimes. You don't always know them. They're not always just crystal clear. Some are, but some aren't. And so instead of thinking, oh, that's the peer, they don't have any boundaries. It's like maybe this experience itself is very difficult to navigate, supervise people through that. There's nothing to pathologize around that. And also consider things like non-peer staff. I meant to non-peer, not non-staff. Other non-peer staff use supervision. Like one of the things I can't stand is peers. I don't want peers using supervision as therapy. Excuse me. Other non-peer staff use supervision as therapy. So how do you work with that? Other non-peer staff lack boundaries. So how do you work through that? I see some of you nodding. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I really feel like we're put into a different category because of our mental health diagnosis or mental health background, but really some of the situations, I'm sorry, other other non-peer, people who identify as peers do the same things. So how do you handle that? So I'm going to go for an example here about again, kind of bringing together what we talked about in terms of the peer job, the peer role, et cetera. And thinking about kind of an inpatient unit situation. And I'm gonna say it like this. I'm gonna say I do not have lived experience in recovery in inpatient unit. I'm going by what working with students and hearing students, and also and also having to do some work, doing some work around in the environment. And I'm also coming from an ideal, because I'm going from ideal here. Because here's what I'm thinking. The overall goal. Remember, talk about the end game. Like, what do you hope and want for your participants? What do you want for them to think? How do you want them to talk about their experience when they leave many years down the road? You like to assure people that recovery is possible and that the mental health struggle isn't a death sentence. And starting to get people to think about their life outside and what they want to return to or create. So sparking interest in wanting to move forward. Okay, think about that overall goal. What do you hope when you're working with people? What do you want them to walk away with? I would say those are two really good, generous goals you'd want if somebody you're working with is in crisis and they end up in a psychiatric ward. So here's some ideas that I got from peer support workers in inpatient units that they've done that have really proven to be successful. Again, not all of these are going to work. You're going to pull for what resonates for you and leave the rest. But one of them was, my favorite was, read the newspaper and discuss topics of interest, avoiding religion and politics. Don't do that. that could get you into hot water. But just getting people to talk about what's happening in the world. It's about engagement, because if people are in crisis or trying to work through a moment of crisis, it's really important to get people being and present and to the here and the now. And then also connecting to them what's happening outside themselves and less with what's happening internally. So talking about what's in newspapers and discuss topics of interest. I would like, for instance, New York Times send around the style section of the Sunday paper or something, or the leisure section, getting conversation on things like that. Trivia games, charades, questions and games that spark good times in people's lives. So they have good memories of what actually did work on the outside. So like the question, like the first time you ate candy, fun questions about connecting them to what it's like, to remember that where they came from, the good stuff of where they're from. And also just doing puzzles, crafts, origami, and just chatting, just being. As we said, recovery happens in relationship. Sometimes just sitting side by side, talking about whatever, maybe not even talking at all, just being is enough. It's enough. And it's more than enough, actually. So going back to this hiring, thinking about when you're thinking about hiring, here's some questions that I always ask myself. What skills and abilities must I have now? Like from Jump Street, what skills do I need somebody to be able to do from the very beginning? What skills or abilities am I willing to teach, or can I allow to be developed over time? For instance, I'm hiring for a career coach at our program. And my must-have nows are someone who has really great engagement skills, people skills. I can teach the admin stuff. I can teach how to, use the database. I can teach how to, do progress notes. Actually, one of our trainers is here, Pammy. Hi, Pammy. She teaches writing notes, right? We can teach people how to do that. Can't teach people engagement skills. So that's what I need up top. I also think about what are your cannot deal with. That's what I call it, cannot deal with. Again, this is not just about peers. Remember, this is about any job. What are the things that I can't deal with? I know one of the things I know that doesn't work for the work that we do, especially working with people, is people who don't exercise critical thinking skills for a couple of reasons. One is because so often so much of our work is in real time that you have to be able to think on your feet and kind of assess and kind of pivot in time. So you need somebody who's able to do that. Again, depending on what you're doing, what your services are. But I know for me, I need people able to pivot, because if they're in a conversation with a participant brings up something that we weren't thinking about, I want somebody to be able to think critically about, how should I answer this question? Do I need to go and come back? Like, what do I need to do? But at least be able to think in real time. So when I'm hiring people, I'm always asking scenario questions because I want to get a feel for how the applicant thinks through stuff. So I don't say, do you feel comfortable working with people in a group? They're going to say yes. That's what they're going to say, right? They're in a job interview, they can tell you what they want to hear, right? But if you bring up a scenario of, okay, so our groups are, we always have groups every Tuesday, and we have about 10 people, and this is the subject matter, and someone says, someone continually, disrupts the flow of the class or this flow of the workshop. What do you do? How do you handle that? You want to hear what they have to say about that. Ask questions based on something that they say in real time in the interview. Like in the interview, listen for answers and see if you can ask questions based on what they actually just said, so you get a feel for applicants' process turnaround time. Right? So you want to ask them, they say, I like the, I like the color blue. Why do you like the color blue? Like, get that process turnaround time. Because again, as I said earlier, in this work that we're doing with people, you don't always have the ability. I have to stop here and go ask my supervisor. Like, I can't. Sometimes you just don't have that. A lot of times you do. Sometimes you do, but sometimes you just don't. You want to know that someone has grace under fire. Little grace under fire. You can ask questions about what do they think your participants are dealing with or working through, right? To see if their vision matches what you see and hear from your participants. You want somebody who has a general understanding of of the experience of our participants, especially if you're looking for support around developing effective services, right? And you also want to see if people are far enough along in their just human development that they can see beyond themselves. They're insightful and can see beyond themselves. If they're just talking about me, what I want, what I need, whatever, they're not ready to work with people and in the way you want them to. Again, depending on the work you want people to do. But they haven't made that jump, that leap yet from me to we in terms of how they see the world. And here's some supervising supervising notes that I love to also offer people that I think really work really well. Strength-based feedback. Focus on what works. and be specific. Not just, oh, you're really good at your job, or you're so nice. You're so nice to everybody. But I like the way you spoke to Joseph, because what you said to him, I saw his face light up, and that really made a difference for him. And you have a really great gift in communicating to people. And I see that you have this really great gift of helping people recognize their own recovery in themselves. I think that's great. That's the kind of feedback you're looking to give people. Assume staff mean or intend to do a good job, and hold space for that. Oftentimes when we're supervisor managers, we have a lot going on in our heads. And I know sometimes when I'm overwhelmed and everyone's getting on my last damn nerve, I could come from the perspective of, you're messing me up here. You're messing me up here. We're trying to get something done. You're messing me up. I mean, that happens to the best of us. But if you can hold space with the intention that you're assuming people want to do a good job, come from that space. Regardless of what people do, come from that space. Oh, I am real. Believe you me, Kalich, I'm real. Come from that space, and you'd be surprised the kind of feedback you can give to people that can help you frame what to say and how to approach people in feedback. As a supervisor, normalize and model making mistakes. So important. Because you can have all the data in the world in your head, and you can do the best job you think possible, and it doesn't land for the people you're serving. Because people are complex beings, and you can't always get it, quote unquote, right every single time. And one of the hard parts, and I will say from the other part of it, and this goes not just for peers, this goes for everybody. Nobody likes being wrong. Nobody likes making mistakes. They're afraid they connect it to their very being. A lot of people are very much entrenched in shame. So mistakes are connected to, I'm a bad person. Not just I made a mistake and I can fix it, but I'm a bad person. As a supervisor, it really helps if you can normalize and model. And this might mean some growth and development on your part. Okay. Making mistakes, acknowledging, apologizing, learning from the mistakes, incorporating what you learned in the mistakes, normalize it. Because that will really help people and the people that you serve be able to also be okay with making mistakes and learning. Because over time, they will become more adventurous. They will bring more to the table. They will come with their ideas because they know it's safe to say, hey, I have this idea. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about that. Here are some things I'd like to offer. And let's try stuff out. That's the kind of team you want. People who will bring stuff to the table. But they're not going to do that if you're always looking out for mistakes and calling people out. Normalize and model reassessing. Meaning you try something out, see if it works. If it doesn't, pivot. That's okay. And normalize that. Normalize that as part of your work. Because again, as a peer, and again, as everybody, it kind of hits into that not wanting to be right, not wanting to be wrong thing. It's okay if you try something out and it didn't work, and you made a calculated effort, it didn't work, to reassess and try something else. And when you're reassessing, focus on the efficacy for the participants, not on whether the peer or the staff is right or wrong. What you did was wrong. What you did was right. But how did what you did or what you did land? Oh, okay. So what we're doing, it doesn't seem to be effective for participants. They don't seem to be responding. This doesn't seem to be helpful for them. Let's talk about something else we can do. Not you did that wrong. What you did didn't land. Because that really undermines intention, that undermines people's confidence and efficacy. Celebrating failure is another evidence-based. Yes, celebrating failure, exactly. It really helps to focus on, because ultimately what you're doing is you want to keep your team thinking about the efficacy for the participants. You're all on the same team, right? Why is my thing not working? Right? So that's my last word on this. So as a supervisor, you're building a team, and you and your staff, including peers, are on the same side, supporting participants in their recovery. Act like it. Whoever you hire is on your team to support your participants. Keep the focus on that, and you'll just you'll hit it out of the park. So that's the end of my material. Again, my name is Lynnae. I'm the director of Howie the Harp. That's my email if you want to get in contact with me. And that was shorter than I thought. We have questions. We can do Q&A. Yay! Yay! Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynnae. Yeah, feel free to raise your virtual hand. It's under reactions at the bottom if you see that. And yeah, we can take questions now.
Am I looking at chat? Let me see.
Yeah, there's one. Ann Casper.
Hey,
Hi,
Ann.
Lynnae. Nice to see you over there in New York. Can you talk more about making mistakes and shame and working in the peer world? How do we do this? And when does it? So that's first question. Second question: when does it come to firing a peer?
So here, those are such good questions, Ann. So I would say the following. So, and I cannot even begin to, talk about the impact of shame in a really in-depth way in this moment. I would say absolutely look at the work of Lynnae Brown about the power of shame and what shame is. But I would say this. So what sticks with me around shame is the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. Right? So if people are thinking personally, I am a bad worker, what I did makes me a bad person. When people are there, that's when you're going to get you're not going to get really great work skills, and then people aren't going to show up really well for you, or for the participants. I'm sorry, not well for you, well for the participants. So that's why it's important to focus on the efficacy of your programming towards the support of the participants, as opposed to pointing out you're doing something wrong, you did this, you did that. It's really important to look about the overall impact. It also helps because, again, a lot of people feel this way, not just peers, but people haven't made that distinction between guilt and shame in their own lives. And so that's why often people have a hard time receiving feedback. I know that was mine for many years. I had a hard time hearing feedback because I hadn't made that distinction between guilt and shame. And also, I have a lot of shame in my background, so it can be very difficult. So just keep that in mind. And so that's the way you want to supervise, is you want to supervise with the understanding that that might be there. And so if somebody gets defensive about what you're saying to them, you want to say things like, no, I understand you're doing the best job you can, and I appreciate it. I'm just thinking about the efficacy for the participants. Or what did you think about it? I saw this outcome. I saw the participant didn't engage this way. What did you think that was about? How do you think we can all do something so that the participants more engaged? It's kind of a way of keeping people out of the I did something wrong, I'm a bad person sort of thing. Yeah. The second part of your question about firing peers, again, it's kind of like for any other job. It's like focusing on the actual work itself, right? If you have a clear job description and you made it clear what the expectations are, and someone you've hired isn't living into them, then you always go back to that. That's the important thing. This is something I've learned really early too. If you do the front end work of thinking through what you want people to do and your expectations, you have something to point back to and hold people accountable for. So they can't say, well, I didn't know. It's like, well, actually, we did talk about this at the hiring. This is the things that we talked about. And I said that the program needed. And we've been working on, and you don't seem to be able to or want to or whatever. But it's always going back to the work itself, always going back to the job description, the expectations, right? And keeping it off the actual person and their goodness or badness. Again, that goes for any job. Right? Hope that answers your question, Ann.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Looks like we have Clinisha, and then we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Cool.
I just like that. I think that you're the same person no matter where you go. So I just love that, and that you're like approachable as a supervisor. So that's good. But I think what I want, I don't know if you share, because I have to step away a few times, but my struggle with my supervisor is she thinks that everything needs to be an email, like important. I don't know how to describe it, but it's so, that's where we kind of bump heads. And I'm like, wait, we all learn different. Everyone, like, clearly if you have to repeat yourself, somebody's not getting it. We need a team meeting, like, and stuff like that. But trying to use the right verbiage, or
Hello?
Anisha, I think we lost you.
Oh, okay.
maybe it's a personal thing. I don't know.
Oh. Okay, so I didn't catch your whole question, Clinisha, because I think you came in and out. But the part that I got was about your supervisor wants everything in emails. Let me ask you. Did you ask your supervisor why?
I think it's just quicker. She says like just to get it out really fast. But
because the reason I'm asking is because I know, as someone who juggles a lot, I like things in email so I remember and I can refer to stuff. Because people will tell me stuff walking down the hallway or just in conversation, I'm not going to remember it. And if it's important to remember, it's hard to keep track of a lot of things. I know if I have it in writing, that I remember what I said, what was discussed, maybe something I might have to follow up on. It's really easier sometimes. But I hear what you're saying. Sometimes you like a discussion face to face, but sometimes that could be it as well. So it's not just about like, what's, how different different people learn. It could be that too. I hope that answers part of your question. Did you have a second part of that question? That's the other part I really heard.
No, that's fine. That helps me think of it in a different way as well. But I just feel like if you have to keep repeating yourself about the same thing, then a meeting should be called, right? Or like we should come in and talk about it versus continue back and forth with emails with the whole peer team. If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. I mean, obviously, it depends on the situation. You're talking about something very specific. And that sounds like, from your perspective, that sounds like kind of a failure on your supervisor's part. If they're hearing something, the same thing over and over again, and they're not seeing a need to come together, that sounds like again, I don't know details. I'm just saying that doesn't sound like a supervisor's part. And I don't know if you've asked them to have a meeting, but yeah, that's an unfortunate part. If you feel like there should be a meeting. Have you expressed that you think that a meeting is important?
Yeah, we ended up having a meeting, and so we were able to talk about it, and it was way better because we were able to hear, and then people were afraid to speak up, which I don't like. They really need those meetings, but they were afraid to speak up for whatever reason. So.
Got it. Yeah.
We can move on to the next question. I know there's a lot in the chat. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get to as many in the chat as we can. The first one that came through is from Leslie. Just curious, how did the title Howie the Harp come about?
So this program concept came about by Howard Geld, who is one of he's called one of the fathers of the consumer psychiatric movement. He was known as Howie the Harp because he played the mouth harmonica. He's a street musician, the way he raised money. And he's the one who came up with the concept of having this classroom training plus an internship and supporting people and getting peers to work in the system. And then before we opened our doors, however, he suddenly died at the age of 42. And the center was renamed in his honor. And you can actually, if you Google Howie the Harp in quotes, you'll find a whole bunch of information. There's just videos of him. You'll see histories about the program, etc. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Okay, next one is from Anna. Can you speak about the stigma peer support specialists are still dealing with at work in non-peer environments, and are self-stigma and internalized stigma?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, that's like a whole conference in and of itself, right? The idea of stigma, the way people see us and also the way we see ourselves. I would just say, as a peer, I know for me, again, I've been doing this for 11 years. I've been working on my own development of how I see myself, right? I've started there. I stopped looking for affirmation from other people to let me know that, oh, am I okay? I'm looking for me to know that I'm okay. So I kept doing the work myself. And as a process of evolution, and one of the things that I came to the conclusion of is I still struggle with emotional health and there are reasons for it. I'm a Black woman in America. There's a reason why, okay, that I'm having a hard time, okay? There's no mystery to why I'm having a hard time, right? If we can normalize the reasons that brings us here, to our dysregulation of our nervous systems. That's how I see it now. I didn't even see don't even get me started on this whole mental health DSM bullshit anyway. I'm really thinking the more I work in this field, my thing is there are reasons why we're having difficulties living in this. This life is hard. Hard things are happening to people. When hard things happen to people and you don't have the coping mechanisms, you end up acting in certain ways out of survival mode. There's reasons. And if you accept that these are logical reasons, you stop stigmatizing yourself. That's where I start. Hope that helps.
Thank you. We do actually have at 1:30 another talk about stigma. It's in the Felicity room if anybody wants to take a look at that one. Next question is from also Leslie. We are struggling with some non-peers being overly concerned about peers having missed time or being unable to work an assigned schedule. Do you have any stats on any of this that I could share?
I'm not aware of stats. I'm not saying there aren't any stats, but I'm just saying I'm not aware of stats. I will say I do know that when I first got to Howie the Harp and I asked peer employers, people did cite those as issues when it comes to peer workers. And I would say a couple things about that. One is that you can actually control. Is the job they're doing offering a service to be held accountable for? One of the problems that I think that people don't understand is if you created a peer job that doesn't have a real role, a real meaty part of the work that you're doing, people sense that. People sense that they're not really needed. And that could be part of it. You know, that could be part of it. Another part of it also is, like, this is a conversation I have with people that I hire and the people that I work with. I understand that part of being in mental health recovery is you have moments that that you might not be doing well, et cetera. That's understandable. And we need to have a conversation about what does that look like in terms of how your work is going to get done. I understand that you're going through this, yes. And we still have participants who need this support, this work that we need to get done. So can we talk about and collaborate? What do we do when this happens? There has to be a collaboration and involved in covering services. There has to be an accountability. And oftentimes when those kind of things happen in terms of like people being out and missing, those are two concepts that I find that people haven't addressed. Because people know when they're not needed. People know that. Period. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Anna, you might have to elaborate on this one a little bit. Any suggestions on what we can do to change that environment? I'm not sure which part you were referring to there.
Oh, thank you. It was part of the question about stigma.
Yeah, see, to me, that is a big ask of any individual to take something like that on, especially when they haven't worked on their own self-stigma. Like, that's like trying to control other people about how they treat you when you haven't gotten your own self figured out. That's the problem I'm seeing, right? Work on your own, how you're seeing yourself and stigmatizing yourself. You'd be very surprised what happens once you make that work over, how that will exude in the work and how you end up moving forward, and come up with your own ideas of how to help negate stigma in the workplace. But this whole idea of trying to make other people do something, changing other people's minds, it's really hard to do if you haven't worked it out for yourself and not stigmatizing yourself. Because what it feeds into is, again, when I'm going by what I see is, what you're saying is not you personally. What I'm seeing is people going, I want you to treat me a certain way, and yet you're not treating yourself that way. I think also a lot of peer values help along with stuff, stigmatizing too. I think a really great thing peers can do is when they're in, for instance, if they're in a staff meeting and people are talking about somebody being a schizophrenic or talking about their symptoms, you might be the one to say, oh, Jack? Oh yeah, Jack had a struggle the other day. I think he was struggling around blah, blah, blah. Humanizing, normalizing, connecting, understanding why people are doing and saying what they're doing and saying based on some maybe additional information you might have that helps it make sense, as opposed to just this weird thing someone's doing or saying, so it's a symptom, right? Sometimes filling in gaps and helping people connect the dots keeps people out of stigmatizing and just goes, oh, that makes sense why somebody would say or do that. I find that really powerful for people. And I think sometimes, I know the medical model strips us of that kind of critical thinking. That's the unfortunate part, right? Hope that helps.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Also, I'm going to be putting an evaluation in the chat based on this presentation. So if you could peer facilitator or even a peer leadership role, which I have, but what about when the peers are seeking our advice?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I think my thing went off.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. Let's see. We are not supposed to advise in a peer facilitator or even a peer leadership role, which I have, but what about when the peers are seeking our advice?
A couple of things. One is there's a saying that we have at Howie the Harp called pulling wisdom from the group. I would spend time first talking to people about what they think. Try to pull as much information from people. Oh, what do you think? Well, where are you in understanding of the issues? Where are you in understanding? And what are you thinking that could be a possibility? Or what do you think? Those kind of turning it back and asking people what they think. People often surprise themselves in how much they know. Sometimes people ask for advice because they're afraid of what they know. They're afraid that what they're thinking or what their experience isn't correct. And if they can offer up front, like, I've done this or I've seen this and it really works. And then you as the advisor says, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Go with it. Sometimes people just need support in that what they're thinking, a possibility is a good idea. The other part too, I know this is, I'm very guilty of this. Sometimes as a supervisor, I know for a lack of time, it's easier, just do this and keep it moving because I have so many things to do. It takes more time to ask people questions and what they thought and helping people think through stuff. But it's really important and part of development because it helps people realize over time, oh, I've offered ideas over and over again, and I've been affirmed that my ideas are correct or sound like good, reasonable ideas. And then people build confidence over time from that. It's worth it. It's worth that doing that front end work with people. So as they develop over time, they build confidence in their own ideas. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Lynnae. That was really wonderful. So again, I put an evaluation in the chat. If you wouldn't mind, please filling that out. And again, thank you. That was really great. Our next session is going to be at 10:15, and it's ensuring quality using customer evaluations in peer co-reflection supervision with Ann Casper. So this link will remain the same throughout the day, so feel free to come and go or pop around into the other rooms, which all have different links. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank y'all, and I will send the PowerPoint over to Kath for distribution, no problem. Thank you so much. Take care, y'all.
Great job, Lynnae. Really liked
Thank you.
it.
Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate you.